So we'll go for this basic it's applied to you. Basic study guide. Enquiries. You can mute yourself. In paragraph 1.1, if you see the SNT-TC-1A paragraph 1.1, personnel whose specific jobs require appropriate knowledge of the non-destructive test they perform, witness, monitor, or evaluate. The SNT-TC-1A interpretation panel acted on the following inquiry about this section. Paragraph 1.1 SNT-TC-1A refers to individuals who perform, witness, monitor, or evaluate non-destructive tests. It is intended that individuals whose principal function are to witness, monitor, and evaluate non-destructive tests be qualified in the same manner as those whose principal function is to perform non-destructive tests. So his question is something like this. Their response, let us see what is there. Then we understand. It is intended that employer designate through the written practice as recommended in paragraph 5 specific jobs that require knowledge of the technical principle of NDT or non-destructive testing. The employer should test the statement of paragraph 1.1. Personnel whose specific jobs require appropriate knowledge of the technical principles underlying the non-destructive test they perform, witness, monitor, and evaluate against the specific job elements of the personnel in question in order to establish whether or not the specific job requires knowledge of non-destructive testing. So paragraph 1.4 very clearly states that intent that detailed recommendation of SNT-TC-1A should be reviewed and modified by user to satisfy unique needs. This allowance was originally incorporated in recognition of the fact that each manufacturer and each service organization has a different clientele. Customers or clientele requirements ultimately determine what acceptable between buyer and seller, even to the details of qualifying entity personnel. May an employer deviate from the guidelines to meet his or her specific needs? It is our company's specific written practice acceptable? Yes, in accordance with paragraph 1.4, the employer should modify the guidelines to meet his or her needs. It is against S&T policy to judge the applicability of company documents. As a general comment, it is the employer prerogative to establish his or her criteria for certification. It is then the customer's prerogative to accept or reject those criteria. So in between customer and his acceptance. Then inquiry 4. Is it the intent paragraph 1.4 that employer can modify the guidelines to extend that level 2, level 3 entity personnel can be certified without any examination if written this way in this written practice? What are the limits that intended regarding how much the employer can deviate from SNT-TC-1A as written? If no limits are given, the employer can change the entire context. Is that intent eliminate all certification exam? No. The previous paragraph 1.4 allow modification of the detailed recommendations It is not intended to allow elimination of the basic provisions of the document. Paragraph 9.2 requires certification in accordance with Section 8 examination as described in the employer written practice. So you cannot change the minimum requirement. Training, certification, those things cannot be. SNT-TC-1A allows modification of detailed recommendation as necessary to meet particular needs. The intent is that there is a technical rationale to support such modification. Elimination of requirements such as training, experience, and examination goes beyond modification of detailed requirement. ASNT has received frequent inquiries from a variety of sources regarding mandatory imposition of recommendation SNT-TC-1A into firm and inflexible requirements. By design, the document lists recommendations which are intended to use selectively in support of the individual needs of each employer. However, due to the part of such request from some type of mandatory requirements documents, ANSI SNT CP-189 was developed as a standard that established the minimum requirement for qualification and certification of NDT personnel. ASNT always intended that the recommendation of SNT-TC-1A be applied with flexibility of region, recognizing that business enterprise often may need to satisfy differing customer requirements. Should the personnel who operate ultrasonic digital thickness measurement equipment be qualified and certified? To what level should such personnel be certified? Does ASNT anticipate a change in SNT-TC-1A that would provide specific recommendation? Can you mute yourself? Read me. If you are not there also, okay. Because when I am starting, I have to complete. That's all. To what level should such personnel be certified? Does ASNT anticipate a change in SNT-TC-1A that would provide specific recommendation for qualifying and certifying such personnel? Whether an entity personnel should be certified depends solely upon needs of employer and the requirements of the employer customer clientele. Likewise, the level to which personnel should be certified depend on the same factor 1 above. Note the paragraph 4.1 provides the subdivision within the levels as needed, either what the company needs. So paragraph 1.4, these are intended to provide the employer with adequate flexibility to accommodate a variety of special needs as documented in the written practice. While the recommended training course outline doesn't specifically address digital thickness measurement, the principles of pulse ecotechnique are those involved. The training course outline does provide instruction of the employer specification equipment used, and as with the remainder SNT-TC-1A, the training course outline should be modified if necessary to meet the employer's specific needs. Enquiry 80.4. Two other inquiries pertain to this concept. Both inquiries have the same response. NDT examiners in our employ who perform examination using liquid penetrant use only visible dye, solvent removable penetrant technique. So visible dye penetrant only they are using. Since our examiner do not have need to be qualified in the other liquid penetrant techniques, is it permissible to modify the number of general and specific questions as well as hours of training and work experience to satisfy requirement of level 1, level 2? May an employer deviate from the guidelines to meet his or her specific needs? Sorry, I think I go run above that. Response. It is the intent of SNT-TC-1A is recommended practice, and that is a guideline which should be modified by employer as necessary to meet his or her particular needs. The employer should determine his/her needs, determine the necessary qualification of his/her examination to meet those needs, and describe those in his/her written practice. Some comments. Paragraph 1.4 is modified in the 2011 edition of provide user with additional guidance to ensure that when a user develops written practice, the fundamental requirement of SNT-TC-1A are maintained and that only modifications are documented with rationale for deviation. This modification was retained in 2016 edition in section 2 definition. Each of these terms should be carefully studied. For example, NDT practitioners may not clearly understand the difference between qualification and certification. Considering each term as different is the process of qualifying personnel involves assessment of the adequacy of skills, training, experience, and personnel being considered for certain tasks. The process of qualifying may require that education and training be imparted to such personnel. Assessment of qualification often requires that the personnel be examined. Following the process of qualification, individual meeting the exceeding of minimum qualification requirements of employer can be certified. That is, the employer provides evidence that qualifying process is followed. Such evidence make up employees ascertain that certain individuals are qualified to perform certain critical functions and is the employer certification that evidence of qualification exists. Limited certification for ultrasonic thickness measurement and radiographic film interpretation have been retained in the edition. These certifications are intended to limit it in the scope of qualification but not the responsibility of level 2 individual to define in a section 4. There is no level 1 limited certification. Fundamental in free enterprise is the tenant that producers of goods and suppliers of service are ultimately responsible for quality and effectiveness of such goods and services as well as bearing responsibility for shortcomings and failures. Therefore, regardless of details of the process by which individual become qualified, the direct employer of the personnel being certified must bear the end responsibility for conferring a certification and thereby can be only certifying agency. Such absolute responsibility doesn't preclude the use outside service by employer to assist the imparting and or asserting qualification to individuals being certified. The use of outside service doesn't relieve the employer from responsibility, nor can the employer abrogate or delegate his responsibility to an outside agency. SNT-TC-1A has been referred by certain codes and specifications to be used in effect as a model for employers to develop a written practice concerning some methods of NDT not currently covered in SNT-TC-1A. I'll go for inquiries only. (76.3) Inquiry. Is it the intent of SNT-TC-1A that the level 1 entity person described in paragraph 4.3a of 1975 edition of this document be the same as the level 1 individual described in 68 edition paragraph 4a with both having the same capabilities? Yes. The changes in the wording between 75 and 68 version of SNT-TC-1A insofar as the duties and capabilities of level 1 personnel is concerned were intended only to clarify the intent of document. None of these changes in wording were intended as a substantive changes. As version of SNT-TC-1A change, the older is replaced by the newer version with correction to be addressed at recertification time. So when you recertify, you can change as per the newer code, and written practice you can modify. That's all. Enquiry. In accordance with SNT-TC-1A 75 edition, may a level 1 entity person who has been trained, qualified, and certified to accordance in accordance with 1975 edition be sole person to perform, evaluate, sign for final acceptance of entity examination in accordance with written procedure and acceptance standard with occasional surveillance and guidance from level 2 and level 3. Yes, the intent in SNT-TC-1A is that level 1 person may perform the above functions provided they are in accordance with written procedure and so documented in the employer written practice. Enquiry 78-9. Is it intended that personnel currently certified as NDT level 3 within the guideline of SNT-TC-1A who also regularly perform level 2 functions as qualified as recommended paragraph this and this? Response. It is the opinion of interpretation panel that personnel currently certified as level 3 may regularly perform level 2 functions without specifically being qualified as a level 2 as recommended in practice. Paragraph this and this SNT-TC-1A. However, as recommended in paragraph 9.7, all levels should be periodically recertified. Enquiry 3.2. May an entity level 3 develop, qualify, and approve entity procedure and establish and approve techniques in the methods in which not certified? No. See the response to Inquiry 9-1, Part 2, and Inquiry 10.5. Inquiry 9.1. With regard to NDT level 3 signing of the certification after successful completion of trainees examination, is it the intent that NDT level 3 must be certified in the method for which he or she signing off as per SNT-TC-1A paragraph this? Is it commonly accepted in the industry that NDT level 3 can sign off on certification for methods other than those in which he or she is certified? The question refers to two separate issues. Can an entity level 3 sign off one certification in methods for which he or she is not qualified? Yes, signing off on certification is covered by section 9, certification record. In paragraph this states that a person's certification record must have the signature of a level 3 whose verified qualification of a candidate for certification. It doesn't require that the level 3 be certified in particular test method. But he cannot develop, qualify, and approve entity procedures. Can an entity level 3 develop, approve, and training and examination program of entity methods? He or she is not qualified? No. Paragraph states that entity level 3 should capable of training, examining, Level 1, Level 2 personnel for certification in those methods for which Level 3 holds certification. Determining industry practice is not within the scope of SNT-TC-1A. Enquiry 9.2. Should entity level 1 technician be allowed to make the final determination as to whether a production part is accepted or rejected and then sign up on the production order paperwork if they follow step-by-step procedure developed by level 3? Response. Level 1 personnel may accept or reject part according to written instructions and record results, reporting the final results required by level 2 or level 3. General comments on section 4 implicit in the definition level 1, level 2 or level 3 as outlined in paragraph is the concept that the qualification of level 3 equal and exceeds those of level 2. The employer must be satisfied with the proficiency of that individual at any level to handle work task. SNT-TC-1A is not intended for use to determine the individual proficiency. It is intended to guideline to establish qualification. Review question for section 4 based on the foregoing discussion. Answer. Okay. Written practice. General comment on section 5. Implicit in the use of SNT-TC-1A, the requirement that the employer shall develop a written practice. SNT-TC-1A provides the guideline. The written practice set forth the details. When the departure from SNT-TC-1A guidelines are made, the written practice should record the departure. It is good practice to record all departures even when there is present situation in excess or with greater strength than the recommendation. Based on the foregoing discussion, answer the questions. Page 31. Education, training and experience requirement for initial qualification. Enquiries for section 6. May the experience requirements expressed as certified entity level 2 in paragraph 6.3. Is this in the 75 edition be considered to include experience gained in and assigned comparable to the entity level 2 in determining the prerequisite requirement of candidate for certification of as a level 3? If so, may this acceptance of experience of an assigned comparable to extended to include similar subparagraph under paragraph this for earlier edition of SNT-TC-1A. That is the requirement of notes. A person may be qualified entity level 2 with no time mentioned. Okay, notes are there. You just go through this. I'm not going through all this. Response to that question, paragraph 75 edition says documented training and or experience gained in position and activities equivalent to those of level 2 or level 3 prior to establishment of employer's written practice and certification program in accordance with the document shall be considered as satisfying criteria for paragraph. So that should be documented. Documentation required. If documentation was not produced during such prior experience, an affidavit or other suitable testimony regarding such experience may be evaluated by the employer to aid the determining equivalence. This response applies to 75 edition and all prior editions. SNT-TC-1A. 79-1. In maintaining record, if an individual is working simultaneously in more than one method, should the record reflect the total time spent for each method, or should the time be divided? Okay. Divided proportionately for each of the methods. For example, if an individual spent 50% of his her time on ultrasonic testing and 50% of his her time in radiographic testing for a period of 9 months, would the record show experience of EUT of 4.5 months or 9 months? It is intended that employers' written practice should include detail of maintaining records. It is a good practice to maintaining records. There is no, if you should maintain for each one. So there is minimum 350 hours required for each method you qualified. It is intended that the records should reflect the fact that each individual work time with regard to the amount of time spent on each method and the period of time during which work was performed. Enquiry, is it intended for SNT-TC-1A 75 edition that the time spent in a laboratory exercise during long-term NDT course be considered the only qualifying work time experience? May the laboratory time be given any credit at all as work time experience to satisfy all requirements in table this. It is not intended that laboratory experience in an educational program be directly applied to the work time experience. Laboratory experience is not necessarily applicable to employer product or to the specific codes, standards, or specification in use. However, in recognition of the benefits accruing from the laboratory experience, the employer may include such consideration for adjustment to work experience in his or written practice. It is therefore SNT-TC-1A only. Should the employer decide to do so, he or she should thoroughly evaluate the curriculum to determine its applicability. We'll go through another just inquiry and then stop. We desire to have a member of management for our entity level 3 who, by virtue of his or job duties, will not have worked as a level 2. Clarification is needed relative to SNT-TC-1A. The employer may also not have any previous experience in particular discipline. The questions are, how can a person becomes level 3 if they have not have a level 2 assignment? What type of other experience could be counted for the level 2 requirement? An individual may be given credit for work assignment comparable to that of entity level 2 in the applicable test method. This type of work assignment comparable to the level 2 assignment should be defined by the employer in his or in her written practice. From anywhere they cannot really do anything. This is a question they answered. Okay. You have any questions